Thank you, Mr Chair, and that was pretty unbelievable, the contribution on behalf of Minister Palmer by Ms Ogilvie and Mr Tuck in relation to primary industries. Positive future for all Tasmanians and for every Tasmanian to participate and excel. But no mention, not one, of the biggest challenges facing rock lobster fishers at this time. One of the biggest challenges that they've ever faced, actually, and not one mention from you guys. The proposed changes to expand the 60-pot area in the rock lobster fishery. Now, either the Minister has not yet grasped the devastating impact this rule will have on so many Tasmanians, their families and their communities, or the Minister is hoping if she just ignores it, it'll just go away. And I'd like to assure the Minister, on behalf of the Labor Party, that it's not just going to go away. So, thank you, Mr Chair. And I rise to respond to Estimates Committee A, Minister for Women, Minister for Disability Services, Minister for Primary Industries. And I'd also like to just, I suppose, best way to put it would be I'd like to have a huge shout out now to Janie Finlay. She is our shadow for primary industries, and she is unable to be here today, and I would just like to place on the record just the sheer amount of work that she has done in this area. She's an absolute go-getter. She's such a wonderful member of our team, yeah, look, she has just spoken to so many people and knows this portfolio area so well, and she's not going to let you guys get away with infomercial style speeches. She's really not. She really wants to do the best for the industry, and she's just as passionate about small business as she is about primary industries, and those two portfolio areas go together really well. So one area my colleague has been quite focused on, Ms Finlay, on is the wild fishery sector around the proposed rule and policy changes of the rock lobster fishery. Now, the rule changes which will take effect after November 1st this year are intended to improve the management of the fishery for the future. This will ensure that stock levels are sustainable for all Tasmanians for years to come. Now, Ms Finlay has met with or spoken to a number of fishers, both recreational and commercial investors, representative bodies and researchers about this very important issue. Now, one proposed rule change within the consultation paper that has been highlighted of concern is the expansion of 60 pots into the northwest and northeast regions of the state's waters. There are concerns that fishers will be catching stock in an area that is vulnerable to excess fishing efforts due to the low biomass and egg production in the area. There is also concern that this expansion will only further support some larger operators, while smaller operators, for many who have had this tradition passed down through generations, will be shut out of the industry, placing potential strain on the economic and social viability of regional communities. The commercial fishery consists of 312 licence entitlements with around 165 active vessels and 10,506 individually transferable quota units. There are around 18,500 recreational licence holders each year. Now, in 1995, I'm just going to give you a bit of a history lesson here because we're not talking about the elephant in the room, so I think it's important that this is on the record. In 1995, the fishery had 340 vessels and IMAS estimated 680 direct jobs. ITQs were introduced in 1998 with a recognition by the Tas Parliament that this would promote rationalisation, a reduction in vessels and employment with these costs converted into rent and lease payments to quota holders. Bradshaw surveyed the fishery in 2000 and found that 100 vessels had been removed from the fishery through the process of increasing maximum pot per vessel from 40 to 50 and lengthening the open season. IMAS published direct employment in the fishery in 2018-19 and it had fallen to 341 full-time employees working from only 178 vessels, half of where the fishery was 20 years prior. So, Mr Chair, Now, this issue of the 60 pots has been raised with Primary Industries and Water Minister Joe Palmer on a number of occasions, both in the upper and lower houses. And the Minister is on record saying that she certainly supports all the families of our fishers across the state. However, in estimates hearings last week, Minister Palmer admitted that no research into the social and economic fallout of this proposed rule change had been undertaken. No research. So this decision rests entirely in the Minister's hands. So no data or evidence to rationalise such a significant rule change. So let's get that right as parliamentarians. We're going to make a decision like that without any data, without any evidence, without any research. So what this estimates committee highlighted is that the Minister is going to make that decision without any empirical evidence, without any data. So that decision will be made based on lobbying pressure, will be based on political pressure, will be based on politics, not evidence, not data. A decision that, according to Break a Day Mayor Mick Tucker, could spell the end for other small businesses living in the region, like boil makers, for instance, that are reliant on the fishers in these areas. Now, in a letter received by Ms Finlay and written by Mayor Tucker, who's also quite a good friend of mine, it said, "It is a Break a Day Council's belief that in the absence of an economic and social analysis of the proposed rule and policy changes, a precautionary principle must be applied. As the discussion paper outlines on page 30, there are significant economic and social contributions local vessels offer to eastern Tasmania. It is easy to quantify some contributions. However, contributions such as sense of community and indirect economic impact are not considered. It is our belief that the risks presented to the East Tasmanian economy have not been adequately considered." This is coming from the Mayor of Break a Day Council. "As such, we ask that the committee apply a precautionary principle approach to the proposed rule and policy changes when considering the economic and social risks to the east coast of Tasmania. The Break a Day Council's approach is underpinned by the belief that long-term impacts must be considered over short-term gain. Break a Day Council strongly opposes the proposed rule change of expanding the 60 pot area and requests an in-depth economic analysis of the proposal to be delivered before implementation." Now, to me, that makes sense. This proposal is a reactive and ill-advised response to the current market and does not consider long-term implications. This includes detrimental impacts on the viability of smaller operators, as well as impact on local businesses such as slipways, the boiler makers who all depend on these operators. The economic efficiency reasoning is not adequate to justify its implementation and is of clear inequitable benefit to the larger operations at the expense of smaller operators. We expect this proposal will further consolidate quotas and pots, forcing out small operators who cannot afford to increase their quota based on the size of their boat. The impact of such an occurrence will be detrimental to the Break a Day region's economy. Now, Mr Chair, I don't have to remind you how important it is to protect the Break a Day economy. Now, it is scary to think that there is no data underpinning what could be a flick of the Minister's pen. It also shows incompetency on the government's behalf. And a government that says they care when they stand up and they give their infomercial-style speeches, but words are hollow. It really is to do with how you behave. Now, a government that can't even get the basics right, a government that can't even make decisions based on data and evidence, they'll make it based on politics and political persuasion and lobbying, and a government not willing to do the work. Because I can tell you what, our shadow for Primary Industries is willing to do the work, and she has been working extremely hard in this area, and we are more than happy to support her through this because, tell you what, she is going gangbusters. So the Tasmanian rock lobster fishery is a major contributor to the Tasmanian economy, and we must protect it and the many small business operators that work within it. Now, Minister Palmer recently said in Parliament that it is important to complete the Living Marine Resources Management Act review and also the harvest strategy to prepare the fishery for the future. Wouldn't it be smart to complete this body of work prior to any recommendation to expand the 60-pot area, given the concerns around this rule? Wouldn't that make sense? Like a logical business evidence-based approach? Wouldn't it be advisable to have economic and social research completed before its inclusion in proposed changes? This government clearly has not done the work. We have. It is incompetent, and the government are putting the cart before the horse on this matter. Now, Mr Chair, the concerns keep coming. Members of the Tasmanian Rock Lobster Fishermen's Associations have told Ms Finlay that they have concerns about their representation and that they don't feel like they're being heard. This is an organisation that is led by former Liberal politician Reen Hidding. Now, Minister Palmer has assured Ms Finlay that there are no conflicts here. Now, at the TRF-LA General Meeting in May, which Minister Palmer momentarily attended, members raised that the association should have the fisheries proposed rule changes on the agenda for discussion, but they did not. No. Instead, the room and the meeting minutes note that many had already left for the day, was told that information from the CEO and President's port visits, as well as the formal process of motions from the meeting, would determine the TRLFA's view. How is that representative of members? It's not. It's not a proper process. It is certainly not representative, and it's a slap in the face to those members. Now, where is the data? Where is the informational summary from the port visits? And why hasn't the summary of all voices at the port visits and the association's submission been provided to all members that the association is representing? That is just a matter of due process and good governance. At estimates hearings last week, the department's own acting secretary said no rule of the department would be broken by the TRLFA, sharing the submission to members assuming it wasn't a privileged submission. He also said that the full submission would be actively disclosed through the process. Is this a case of the TRLFA running its own agenda rather than representing its members? I know from Ms Finlay's conversation with fishers that many are concerned about the proposal to expand the 60-pot rule. It really is a big deal, and I can't believe it wasn't mentioned at all in the opening addresses from the government. Now, while the association says that the rule became a formal policy 3 or 4 years ago, members are expected to defend and promote this position. Much water has passed under the bridge. The industry and its fishers have had to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic and the loss of trade to China. Now, Labor believes that the 60-pot rule should never have been included in the proposed rock lobster fishery rule changes. We know from what was discussed and confirmed in estimates that this particular rule could simply be rolled over, as many are, or at least until the work is completed on the Harvest Strategy and Living Marine Resource Management Act. Somewhere in the system, someone has bowed to the demands of the TRLFA. Really, it stinks. Labor urged the government to intervene on this matter and implore the TRLFA to share the full findings from its port visits to the government submission to its members today and without delay. Enough is enough. And speaking of intervention, let's not forget about our world-leading salmon industry. And the 12-month moratorium imposed on the sector.
Just because you say it doesn't make it true.
This is an industry Tasmania and Tasmanians should be proud of, and Minister Palmer said these words herself. This is an industry that provides the state with thousands of direct and indirect jobs, many in regional areas. But when asked in estimates hearings last week on what advice was provided that led to the implementation of the 12-month moratorium, Minister Palmer said it was put in place to give the government time to adequately consult and develop a 10-year salmon plan. Well, that's absolute rubbish.
Of course it is.
If this was the case, why hasn't a moratorium been in place for the rock lobster industry while we're going through a proposed rule change? This is a government ashamed of our world-leading salmon industry. Face it, an industry that is valued at $1 billion, that spends $500 million on Tasmanian suppliers and businesses, a vital part of the Tasmanian economy and community. It is absurd to see you turning your backs on this important sector when they've done so much to help put this state on the map. As Labor mentioned in budget reply and again in estimates hearings, we are still waiting on clarification on what the 12-month moratorium on no new net leasable areas means. Minister Palmer said one thing and then Mr Street came in later in the day to clarify what the minister had actually meant. Now, does this mean that the current 12-month moratorium on no net increases in leasable areas is now underpinning the development of the 10-year plan? That's the problem. You're not being clear in what you're saying, and this is impacting people's lives. Now, let me draw your attention to Jason. Jason has worked in the Tasmanian salmon industry for 17 years, and he's one of the 36 workers on the net slab team at Huon Aquaculture at Whale Point who repair, clean and organise tonnes of netting that are used on the state's offshore salmon pens. He lives locally, supporting his young family, and his children go to the local school.
He's a legend.
If the moratorium on salmon farming continues and underpins the 10-year plan, what will this do to Jason, his job, his family and his community? What is ahead for him if the Tasmanian salmon industry, which is sustainable, well-regulated and world-renowned, fails to be part of the state government's vision to create a $10 billion farm gate value by 2050? And while I mention it, this is a vision which the department's acting secretary confirmed there was no specific data underpinning this goal. It is aspirational. There is no map for anyone within the sector to follow or know how their contributions meet the state's goal. Stop playing politics with people's lives and livelihoods. These are good jobs, and it's really time for the government to stop giving falsehoods. Tasmanians do deserve better. Speaking of deserving better, for the second year in a row during estimates hearings, Ms Finlay raised the story of Gary and Lee Fegan. Now, last year in estimates, Labor asked what work was being done to review the grandfathered, non-transferable fishing endorsements. We then followed up 2 months later in November and were advised that no work had started. Now, at the second estimates, it appears that no work has still been done, with the Minister advising the department has been asked to review the non-transferability status of these endorsements. Now, Lee also reached out this year for help to renew his DIP net endorsement, as he's unable to get a clear answer from the department if this can be done. Now, this is a father and son team that have fished the Tamar for years. Now, the government's handling of that is absolutely incompetent. So it's 2 years that they have been waiting for an answer. Now, the uncertainty and the lack of your decision has caused huge stress on the Fegans. Now, again, stop playing with people's lives, do the work, give people certainty. No matter what your answer is, they just need an answer. They just need to know what your decision is. That is all everyone wants, and from those working in rock lobster, fishery and salmon industry, Jason on the net slab through to Lee Fegan and his dad Gary, Tasmanians just want certainty. That's what they want, and Tasmanians do deserve better.